Hello, friends, and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. Today, friends, you get to time travel. Because for the last 2 weeks, you've been hearing past Matthew, a very different entity, telling you their thoughts about Andor. And you've been listening to that with some of my older hosts, although last week's episode did include, new to the podcast, Aaron McGowan. Now you have the Matthew of today, April the 2nd, along with the Alex of today, also April the 2nd. We've not yet figured out how to time travel across podcasting streams, but we're all here today to talk about Andor Season 2. What do we know from Season 1? What do we know from what we've heard about is coming? All the things we're excited for, all the things we might be trepidatious about, all the things you need to know to get ready to watch what I hope is going to be another fantastic Star Wars series. So, Alex, why don't you start by saying hello and tell us a little bit about how you feeling as we were like 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out from Andor Season 2?
Yeah. Before I start that, Matthew, how do we feel about me including information from the trailers? Nay or yay?
No, this is going to be, I've decided that with primer episodes, if we're going to do a primer, we should talk about the trailers. So
Okay.
I did watch, I wanted to hear about some of the trailers from you, but I did watch the look behind the scenes video that's on Disney Plus for Andor 2. And I also have been seeing a lot of commentary by people online. So yeah, I'm ready for it. Spoil away.
I always just double check because Matthew is a purist and doesn't really love trailers, which I respect very heavily. So, but yeah, I am very stoked. So I just rewatched Andor Season 1 for the first time. I don't think I actually watched the whole show all the way back to front or front to back, all the way through since it first came out. And it got me very excited for the new season. I also, just before hopping on the podcast, I rewatched the most recent trailer that came out at the end of March. And I'm just really stoked. I mean, Andor Season 1 was, a fucking masterpiece. It was just, I remember when it first came out, I remember everyone saying the beginning was a little slow, and it was a little slow. The first 3 episodes, it was a slow burn to kind of get going. But once it got going, oh my God. I mean, everything, like, not even just like the focus on Andor, but the info we got on Mon Mothma, the stuff we got to see in the ISB, just all of it. And it really painted this amazing picture of, the very early beginnings of the rebellion, pre-Rebels, pre all the things we've seen. And I think what excites me the most about the coming season is seeing now how we we've heard in little snippets here and there about, Mon Mothma, flees the Senate, and, the Emperor dissolves the Senate, and we know Orson Krennic is nearing the end of, the finishing of the Death Star, and seeing all of that on screen, all that come together and linked to Rogue One, which is one of my favorite Star Wars movies, it just has me very jazzed.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to start talking about Andor Season 1, because, let me take it again.
Matthew, you're a little quiet for me.
Okay, hold on a second. How's that? Is that better?
Much better.
Yeah, I'm very much where you are, and I think a lot of it really has to do with how just game-changing Andor Season 1 was. Because it wasn't even just that it was like a fantastic Star Wars property. It was like nothing we have seen before in the Star Wars universe.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I think if it was a movie, it would have gotten an R rating. It was the first thing that I think was dark and gritty in the Star Wars universe. And while I do think there's been a little bit too much dark and gritty for the most part. I've loved it with some characters, but like Superman dark and gritty was not a good idea. I think it was something that was desperately needed from Star Wars. And I say this as someone, I think, Star Wars is for everyone. But for a lot of us who grew up with Star Wars, this was kind of like growing up into the more adult version of the story. Because, one of the simplistic things that a lot of media aimed at all ages, but especially media aimed at younger audiences, is the heroes are all good and the bad guys are all bad. And there's an extent to which Star Wars from its very beginning was questioning that, with the whole idea of Darth Vader coming back and saving Luke. But even so, like, for the most part, if you were wearing a Stormtrooper uniform, you were bad. If you were one of our heroes, you were good. And starting with Rogue One, they had really started to challenge that, in having the main character of, this show and one of the main characters of Rogue One, in the first 10 minutes of the movie, shoot his buddy, shoot his ally, because he knows he won't get away. unless he does that. And the show putting us in a perspective of like maybe he was right to do it. There's an awful lot of that kind of thing happening. And like there's a conversation that happens within the first season of Andor that I think is kind of the mission statement of it, where, you know, one character is saying, like, you know, look, I want a rebellion, but I don't want all of this. And the other is saying, like, you can't have a rebellion without getting your hands dirty. You know, this is what a rebellion is like. This is war. And that was just so game changing. I think we'd never seen something like that in Star Wars before. The acting was just, the dialogue was on levels that I've just, you know, have very rarely been seen in Star Wars, especially in live action. I think the animation's gotten there a number of times. And so I admit I'm kind of two minds on this. Like, one thing I'll say is that if you listen to our coverage of Andor Season 1, Paul Hoppy was with me for most of, I think most, not all of the episodes, but certainly a lot of them. And they are a huge lover of Andor. And they don't want to go anywhere near this show because they're so worried that season was so good that like anything that comes next is going to be a disappointment. Is going to be a letdown. And I'm not that negative. After the new Daredevil, you'd think I'd be, because that was a real kick in the teeth, but I'm trying to stay positive. And so I have a little bit of that trepidation, and I'm trying to not like to get my expectations too high. But I'll tell you, yesterday in preparation for this, I binged all 12 episodes of Andor in one day. And my God, it still holds up. It's only like a couple of years old, but it reminded me of like, this is not only some of the best Star Wars we've ever seen, but some of the best television, just flat out, that we've ever seen. And it is such a high bar, and I think they're possible of, if they even come close to it, I will be thrilled. But I think it's possible season 2 is going to hit that bar and go even further.
The reason that I am more optimistic, I think, is that unlike previous Star Wars shows where they're like, is this going to be a one-off season? Are we going to make this ongoing forever? Like, from the get-go, they're like, okay, everyone's signing on, director, writers, everyone, actors, we're signing on for 2 seasons. It's going to be a 2-season show. Like, they had a plan. Like, unlike most Star Wars things, especially when we've seen the messiness that came with the sequel movies, there was an actual plan. And there was no, like, we're going to extend this into 3 or 4 seasons. There's no, we're going to cut the show. And I think the fact that, like, the directors and the writers knew how much space they had to work with, the actors all knew what they were signing up for, to me, that bodes well. And that would suggest that maybe they really do have a plan to, like, continue the same level of quality from the previous season. Now, of course, I think part of the majesty that was Andor, is that we had not seen anything like it before, like you said. And it was like, not that like it isn't just good on its own, but part of it was like, holy shit, where the fuck did this come from? And now it's kind of like we're expecting such high quality, so maybe our expectations are going to be really high and it won't meet them. But I don't know. Again, like I feel like Rogue One was amazing. Season 1 of Andor was amazing. I feel like it would be it was pretty easy to link them together and make a good product, especially when you had a plan this whole time. And they've taken their sweet time. I mean, Andor Season 1 came out in early 2023, right? 22? Yep. 23. It's been 2 or 3 years either way. They've given it time. It wasn't like Mandalorian, not the Mandalorian Season 2 wasn't amazing in Season 3, but those came out every year. They were pumping out a little bit faster. This is like we're giving this 2, 3 full years to really marinate, and I think that hopefully within the time and the planning that it ends up coming together well.
Yeah, and the writer's strike was a part of that, but certainly have planned it. And I do think you're right that my understanding is that Tony Gilroy's plan all along was these 2 seasons, and that he had a lot of it already kind of scripted out in his head, or at least even on paper. And that's actually a great way to jump into, I think, one of the first real questions that a lot of people have raised, because, and you weren't on the podcast at the time, but so you can tell me if you felt differently, but I know a lot of people, myself included, felt that one of the only disappointments was that we raised this story about him coming from this planet that was kind of like, had an indigenous people of sorts that he was part of. They didn't speak Galactic Basic. They spoke their own language. And there's the whole scene with Marva taking him from there and some of the questions that raises. But also, he starts out the show looking for his sister. And with the possibility being that he's looking for his sister and he doesn't find her, but that looking for her starts the whole series of troubles that then dominates the plot for most of the. But that looking for her kicks off the series of events that will kind of drive the plot for the whole season. But there was some kind of confusion or sadness of like why didn't that ever come up again? so I'd been wondering, is that going to come up again in season 2? And I don't know where this is coming from necessarily. And you might know more than I do, but apparently there's a fan theory going around that looks like there is some basis to that. And hey, forget this might be a big spoiler, so if you don't want any of these kind of things, please skip ahead. That Clea Markey, who is the assistant to Lucian in the sort of antiquities shop that they run in Coruscant, though it seems like they may even be partners in terms of their power in the rebellion, or at least in their spy network, that she may well be Andor's sister, Cassian Andor's sister.
I have not seen that, but that seems kind of hype.
Yeah, like I think that would be really interesting. Apparently, a lot of people have done kind of like putting their faces together and showing that she does look a lot like Pedro Pascal, and just some like fact that they've not interacted on screen at all, but we know very little about her background and where she comes from. So I'll just say I think there were the kind of two hanging things left from season 1 that we'd never really addressed how he felt about what Marva had done, and we'd never his sister being tied into all that, and Marva telling him not to look for her. And so I feel like I will feel even better about season 1 if those plot points get paid off in season 2. And it's not a requirement for me, but it's something I'm really looking forward to. And maybe this theory is complete nonsense. I don't know, but I love that it's being talked about.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that would, it would be fun to tie that in. And I would honestly, I wouldn't be mad either way. Like, I'm happy to just kind of have the universe or the galaxy have multiple like-minded people kind of working in different parts of the galaxy. But it'd also be kind of sick if, like, this whole time, right under Andor's nose, like, his employer and his, like, guy who got him really into the fight, his assistant just ends up being the Andor's sister that he's been looking for this whole time. So I feel like either way, that could be I think that is cool. I do want to know either way more about the assistant, though. I hope that we get I want a little bit more background as well on, as longtime podcast listeners know, I suck with names. What is his name? The antiquities dealer, spy man.
Lucian,
thank you. I want to know a little bit more about his background, like where a little more about like where he came from, how he kind of got to where he's at. Like, we get little nuggets in the first season, but I'd be interested to learn a little bit more about that. And based on like the briefness of the trailer, I can't tell for sure, but it looks like we get like some more info on like Mon Mothma, and we see him potentially like, if he makes a deal in season 1 to get access to more finances, basically to fund the rebellion, in exchange for basically like offering up her daughter as a bride to this other Chandrilan man's son. And It looks like we see something that looks, maybe it's just a flash. It's a second on screen in the trailer. Potentially could be a Chandrilan wedding. I don't know. It looks very, very interesting. And it'll be interesting. I like learning about, more about the cultures and the things. And if Mon Mothma had to literally give up her daughter for the rebellion, that sparks a whole nother level of questions and things. It's just a whole nother layer to this. It's really interesting. I don't know.
It really does, especially because, and I hadn't really thought about it as much the first time I watched it, but I especially saw it the second time, is the role of tradition in this show and in the galactic universe. And here I want to give full credit where credit's due. On the Andor Reflections episode that many of you may have just heard a week ago, we rebroadcast it. My two guests for that one were Danielle of Written in the Star Wars and AJ Starkiller of Jedi Starkiller, both on TikTok. Both fantastic creators, and they are both Latino. They are Latino and Latina, and they really kind of were pointing out to me some of the stuff that I hadn't maybe paid enough attention to about the kind of Latino and indigenous origins of, Latino obviously does not exist in the Star Wars universe, but something equivalent to that of the characters and how much it mattered that we hadn't gotten more of those stories. And so I had that in my head as I was watching and thinking about how one of the big things that drives this possibility of the Chandrilan wedding is tradition. And I think one of the things that complicates what you're just saying about Mon Mothma is, like, I think it'd be easy to just not even write her off, but be like, wow, that was really horrible. If she was like, the daughter was like, I'm 14, I don't want to get married. And Mon Mothma was like, no, you have to do this.
Yeah.
But one thing that's happening in that world is that a lot of young people are kind of wanting to reconnect with traditions and are kind of becoming more conservative in some ways. And both Mon and her cousin Val are kind of horrified by this because they feel, it's that kind of like, we've broken away from these horrible traditions. Why are our kids going back to them? But the daughter really wants it. And so, and I was thinking about that because, the last episode of Andor season 1 is that wonderful scene of Marva's burial where
Mm.
tradition is mentioned again and again and how important those traditions are. And even going back, the end of the heist on the planet, I can't, what is that? The end of the heist of the Imperial garrison, all the traditions of the local peoples around the eye matters so much. So I feel like this has definitely been a through point of how, and it makes sense with like in empires and homogeneity and like the attempt to erase all these different local cultures. So I'm really curious about how that's going to come out, and because it doesn't seem coincidental to me that we both have Cassian looking for his people and like understanding that, while at the same time, Mon Mothma is having this very difficult relationship to her native people and their traditions and things like that.
I also hate that Tony Gilroy somehow was a psychic and just foresaw that was happening in America too.
Yeah.
Like, it just feel. I rewatched Andor and I was like, God damn it! How does this feel more prevalent now than when it came out?
I mean, this is true. It was what we talked about the recent book that came out, The Mask of Fear.
Mm-hmm.
This is something I was talking about on my Hunger Games episodes over on Superhero Ethics. Like it's because this kind like what's happening right now in this country is not a surprise. We've been going in this direction for 5 or 7 years, or for 10 years, or even longer. Some would say for 200 years. Depending on how you look at it. And so yeah, they're predicting the future, but also a future that's somewhat predictable.
No, it's fair. It's fair. But yeah, it just hit a lot more
Mm-hmm.
home to me, I think, this time around. And but like you said, I mean, it still like evokes all of that emotion. Like, I got the whole show start to finish. I'm getting angry. I'm yelling at the TV. I'm like, even if I know what's about to happen, I'm like getting all excited and giddy. Like, I love Andor.
Yeah. And if nothing else, Andor does. If nothing else, I think one of the things I'm totally convinced of now, and if nothing else, one thing I'm totally convinced of now is that the timing of that Mask of Fear novel, the first of the Reign of the Empire books, is not at all coincidental. That it came out just, basically in time for people to read it before Andor season 2 comes out, because it is very much a prequel to the TV show Andor, to all of these events, but very much the TV show Andor, because it's about how Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, who we haven't seen yet, but I think is scheduled to show up in Andor season 2,
Mm-hmm.
and all these characters get together. And one thing I hadn't even realized till I heard him say it is that title, The Mask of Fear. One of the lines that Nemec says, who's kind of like the Karl Marx of this young group, the young revolutionary. He's not Che in the leader quality, but in terms of like the philosopher king of the rebels. He, in one of those passages that Cassian is later listening to, he's talking about how the empire is always afraid, and that they are doing all these things because they're afraid of the people, and that's why the people need to rise up. And he says oppression is the mask of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, that's what that title comes from. Yeah,
I
'cause
picked up on
book
that.
is
I picked up on that as well this time around.
yeah, that book is the start of the oppression, and it just ties in so well. And I would like to see more. You're right. I would like to see more of Lucian's background. I want to see how Lucian and Mon Mothma first got together. All this stuff. If we don't see it here, I'm fairly certain we're going to see it in book 2 and book 3 of that trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, I assume that book 2 and book 3 are meant to like lead us right up to Andor season 1, and then Andor season 1 and season 2 kind of take it off from there. I don't know that for a fact. That's kind of what I'm just
Yeah.
assuming here, that will complete. And this, honestly, between that book, Andor, and Rogue One, that's like the most complete telling of any sort of story during this 20-year period of the Empire's like existence between episodes 3 and 4, which is still pretty open as far as stories to be told. So it's I'm happy that we're kind of getting a more in-depth look into this and how the rebellion was really kind of hashed out here. But I think you're right. I think the Mask of Fear came out, and they wouldn't have included Bail Organa as prominently if he wasn't meant to be featured in this show at least a little bit. But I also, besides them, I'm like very excited for the return of Orson Krennic. I think that he's a really interesting little crybaby Imperial, and he's annoying, but that's like by design, I think. And I think the acting is superb in Rogue One, and I am excited to see him again in this season. I also I have no basis for this, but it would not surprise me if we got the return of everyone's favorite CGI Grand Moff Tarkin.
I was just thinking about that. Yeah.
Which, like, again, in small doses, it's fine. It just was a little jarring because that was the first time it was used. Obviously, I've also been rewatching The Mandalorian. Um, the recreation of young Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker in season 2 was oh my god, so much better than what Grand Moff Tarkin looked like. Peter Cushing, sorry, looked like. So if they bring him back, which again wouldn't be mad about, I just need it to be a small amount, very, very small, and it needs to look good.
Yeah, I think they're not going to bring him back because one of the issues that I think has been a big deal with this whole idea is, do you have the consent of that person, or at least even their family, to do so? And I know that a couple of families of actors have sued. Like, so for example, when they used Leia, like her daughter explicitly gave permission for that.
Right.
And now more and more they are trying to like record actors' voice to some extent, and like James Earl Jones gave Disney his permission to do that with his voice ad infinitum. And I'm not going to go into too many details here. We did a whole episode on the ethics of AI last year on superhero ethics. But I think Peter Cushing's estate was one of the ones who sued, saying, "Hey, you shouldn't have done this." I could be wrong there.
No, I think now you're saying it. I do remember there was a little fight about Peter Cushing specifically. I don't remember how that ended up. If memory, I'm not getting into detail. If memory serves, though, his family said it was okay, but like his agent or friend is the one who technically owned the rights to his voice and his acting materials.
Yeah,
and he decided to sue. And so Disney was like, we got permission from the family, but not from the right people. I don't know. So maybe they won't do that at all. Maybe they'll just, leave that out completely.
Well, here's what I was thinking is whether or not he shows up, we know from the novels that there's another player in the whole power struggle. I'm sorry. We know from the novels and from some of the other animated content that there's another player in this whole power struggle over the Death Star versus other Imperial resources. Will we get more of Thrawn?
Dude, I hope so. I would be kind of sick. That'd be a great way to tie it in.
Yeah, I don't know if they could have kept that a secret, but they've somehow kept that a secret, and he shows up. Just for those who don't remember, one of the issues that's happening right now, and this is going to be a good lead into the next segment I want to do, which is really kind of helping people understand the context of when this is taking place. This show is going to be taking place basically over 5 years. The first one I think was over about the course of like a year or so, and this is about like the 16th. That was like the 14th year of the Republic. The 14th year of the Empire. About 6 to 5 years before the Battle of Yavin. Before the Battle of Yavin, which is how a lot of people date things in this universe.
BBY.
And this is now going to be 5 BBY before the Battle of Yavin, up to Rogue One, which is obviously like a couple of days before ends a couple of days before the Battle of Yavin, and so in that 5-year period, we're going to talk about some of the things that are going on to help get you ready for that. One of the things is that there is within the Imperial bureaucracy and of the military, especially the Imperial Navy, this conflict over whether or not the Death Star is a good idea, and a lot of people don't even know about it. They just know that there's all these resources being poured into it, and in the Thrawn novels. The newer set of Thrawn novels that are fantastic, we've done some episodes on, Thrawn figures this out. And he has a real conflict with Krennic and with Tarkin because he doesn't believe this is where the resources should go. And if you remember, this is touched on a little bit in Star Wars Rebels as well. So yeah, and I don't think we're going to get into that side of the story as much. I think we're going to focus much more on the Rebels. But if we are getting some of that, if we are getting Krennic, that opens the door to everyone involved in that side of things. So we might get Thrawn. We might get more of Galen Erso. There's a lot of people we could get in for that.
Yeah, in Rebels, it kind of just touched on the fact that Thrawn wants all the money going to his TIE Defender project.
TIE Defender, that was it.
Which is like the TIE fighters that are better shields, hyperdrives. He argues that an army of those would be far more effective than one giant tin can weapon. And lo and behold, who was always right? Thrawn.
Yeah. Yeah, if you imagine that the TIE fighters not exploding every time either they or a laser beam or a rock comes within like 10 feet of them, maybe the fight turns out a little differently.
Oh, it's funny.
So let's go over what else is happening. How would you describe the what we know of the universe, the galaxy at this time, 5 years before the Battle of Yavin? What's going on?
Yeah, so 15 years post Revenge of the Sith, we're seeing a lot of like individual rebel cells basically starting to form, and
Right.
there's no larger rebel alliance yet. Obviously, we see like that formation happening as we get closer to the end of this period, but as of right now, it's like I'm not sure if Ghost Squadron has been formed yet. The team up in Rebels, but like it's those type of like squadrons, like a few small groups of people, different parts of the galaxy, basically like having their own little rebel acts and fighting against the Empire. But and the ISB, like certain ISB agents are starting to pick up on this. They're like, there are patterns, things are being taken, actions are being done that like they connect. And so there's 5-year periods when those those rebellions start to become a little more bold and connecting. Other things is Palpatine.
Well, so let's go through each of those individually and talk about like what we know of them, and we'll get to the Ghost one, which is the one we know the most about. But I think one of them, for example, is Solo. The movie occurs only about 4 years before all this happens, maybe 3 years. I don't remember the exact date. But so the Enfys Nest, and her group, they may still be around. We know nothing about what happens to them after the events of Solo. They could be kicking around as a group. We don't know much about them. We just know they were a group that got kind of screwed over by the Empire and has now been collecting money and resources and doing some raiding to try and gather what they need to fight back about the Empire.
And yeah, I feel like didn't we see them in animation somewhere? Maybe I'm making that up. I don't know. I could have sworn we saw them somewhere else too. But yes, you were correct. You were correct. Like Empress Nest is going on right now. We have Saw Gerrera's team, which you've seen in different iterations of Saw Gerrera's. We've seen Saw Gerrera back from the Clone Wars, but nowadays it looks like he's moved his operation slowly towards Jeddah, and continuing his kind of much more firebrand efforts of being a rebel squad. And he also is like, he doesn't play well with others, but he is still taking out his guerrilla warfare tactics on the Empire.
And I think that's one of the most interesting things that Andor did, is because within the world of Star Wars before Andor came along, Saw Gerrera represented the most extreme that rebels were willing to go to. And he was often positioned as exactly that he would be the one who would do things that others didn't want to do. And it left you with this question of like, should you be going that far? And then Lucian comes along and even Saw is like, whoa. Although by the end of season 1, with Lucian taking some of the steps he is taking, like sacrificing 30 rebels, because he thinks it's more important to protect this one source. And also he doesn't think very highly of that group of rebels, and they're very useful to him. And Saw's kind of like, yeah, I get that, but wow, this is dark. So it puts Saw and his group in a very interesting position in that he is kind of in line with Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, as we learned at the end of the Andor novel, but we don't really know much else about how he's working with others, how he's positioned versus Lucian, and how they're all going to come together. You lost your audio. I think you may have turned yourself off by accident.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that in Rogue One, for example, we see like that kind of that little meeting that Mon Mothma is heading, and they're debating whether they want to make a strike against Scarif, and let that be the first like really big Rebel alliance strike. And in Rebels, they hint at Mon Mothma's like, I'm going to the meeting. And we've seen like variations of this like alliance forming meeting in different forms of Star Wars media over the years, dating back to like non-canon versions of it in the Starkiller Force Unleashed games. But I think that like this show has the potential to like show us more of that kind of formation. Because if this does indeed overlap, so Rebels, the show, overlaps with this current season of Andor season 2, because Rebels takes place 2 years before the Battle of Yavin, up until and through technically the end of the Empire.
It starts 5 years before.
Does Rebels also start 5 years before?
Yeah, because Ezra is born on Empire Day, he's basically just a couple of days, maybe a week or two younger than Leia and Luke, and it starts on his 15th birthday.
You're right. You were correct. So okay. They're taking place concurrently, and if you all remember in Rebels, there's an episode where Mon Mothma just made a daring escape from the Senate, and the Ghost Squadron helps her to escape Imperial pursuit, so that she can then call, the meeting of the rebels to try and form an alliance. And I don't know this for a fact, but they've kind of, between the trailer, what we saw in the last season of Andor, the book, like we're heading towards the whole idea of Mon Mothma dipping out of the Senate potentially in this season and making that run. So it would not also surprise me if there was some sort of cameo of Hera Syndulla or some of the other members, Zeb, or I don't know. Like we've seen live actions of these individuals in different shows. It wouldn't surprise me if a member or two of Ghost Squadron made an appearance here as Mon Mothma, makes that break and flees.
Yeah, I think when I think of references in this show, I'd love to see actual actors and characters show up. I'd love it if we finally got, Gara Zeb Aurelius on screen for more than like a cameo that is unnamed. But even more important to me is references.
Yeah.
Like one of the things that happens in the early seasons of Rebels is that they come to the attention of this group that is putting together the Rebel Alliance, but for a while they don't want to join. So even if it's just like, Saw and Mon and Lucian talking about what groups should they reach out to, and someone mentioning like, what about that group that's, causing so much trouble on, oh my God, what's the home planet of Ezra?
Lothal.
Even if they say like, what about that group that's causing so much trouble on Lothal? Well, they don't want to join us yet. Like just references like that, I think are going to be really important. Other things that are happening right now is, and this is, we know both from the TV show Rebels, but also from some of the novels, this is around the time that Princess Leia is beginning to get involved. There was that great novel that we did an episode about last year. The great novel that we did an episode about last year, called Leia, Princess of Alderaan. That's about her during this time, and it's about her kind of awakening to being a rebel, her figuring out that both Bail and Breya, her parents, are very involved in the rebellion, and her wanting to become more involved to the point where we see her as like 15 or 16 years old, kind of helping, with a mission that the Ghost crew gets involved with. So there'll be stuff from her. And another possible direction is the Jedi Survivor video games. And those take place earlier. Those took place, again, in the kind of like... Well, actually, no, because we see him as a kid during Order 66, and he's adult. So I think, yeah, those games are taking place around like 10 to 5 BBY, if I remember. And
yeah, that would make sense because they're still Inquisitors. So it could be like that... Cal Kestis, especially the second Survivor game, could be taking place around the time that like the Grand Inquisitor was being killed by Kanan.
Right. And here's one that I'm really unsure of, because I will say one of the things I thought that made Andor so good was there was no lightsabers. And like we clearly love lightsabers, we love the Jedi, we love stories about the Jedi, both positive and negative. But I think there was something really refreshing that Andor felt much more kind of street level. It's kind of the same way like the Netflix MCU shows did, without people who had like the huge superpowers, even though they had some superpowers, but the point. And so I hope that the Jedi are going to be a part of it. At some point, this may be the time that Bail Organa's kind of mission that he started in that book, Mask of Fear, that he starts to convince other people that the Jedi weren't actually like launching a coup, and that all of that is Palpatine's propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the episodes of Rebels are about attempts to rescue like newly born Force-sensitive children. And just the whole process of more of the galaxy coming to know and more of the Alliance coming to know that Emperor Palpatine is the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. I think that would be... It's a knife's edge, and I'd be okay if they don't touch it at all, because I don't want lots of Jedi taking over.
Yeah.
But I would love it if they at least touch on that, because that is another thing that canonically is happening right around this time.
Yeah, and I also don't need to see like a lightsaber. Like I think like the most I could even like if there's like a Bail shows up and there's like a hologram transmission with Obi-Wan that lasts a minute or two where they're just talking. That's the most like I could even handle of a Jedi in this show. I don't need it. I don't feel like we need But this entire show really operated without the Force. We didn't need to see Darth Vader. I will say it would be kind of cool if we saw a Senate proceeding where we saw Palpatine in the Senate, like not Sith I mean, like obviously it's a Sith word, but like Palpatine in his public face in the Imperial Senate is something we've never seen in live action.
Mm-hmm.
That would actually be way more interesting to me than bringing in Cal Kestis or Obi-Wan or one of these other Jedi that are running around right now, because I want to see Masamita and Palpatine, you know, fucking shit up in the Senate, and like how they're manipulating the Senate into dissolving. And especially if we see them, you know, we see you know, my Mothma give that crazy, I mean, she gave a crazy speech as far as we've heard about the speech she gives derailing the Emperor. It's referenced in Rebels and I think one of the books as well. We don't know what she says, so I'm assuming we'll get that speech at some point in the show. But I don't know, it'd be cool to see a brief cameo of Palpatine or of Masamita or someone like presiding over the Imperial Senate and like, you know, directly fight, either like control, you know, presiding over the Senate or fighting back with against Mon Mothma or something along the lines. I don't need a lightsaber, but I do like seeing, you know, we're in the Empire. This is the Empire. Why not show me the Emperor for a minute?
Yeah, no, I think it's very possible. Even if it's just like them watching him on news vids and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like any chance, especially because, you know, Ian McDermott's getting older, any chance to stick him into a Star Wars property one more time, just for like, even just like you said, hollow vid, something for just 30 seconds or a minute. I think it's worth it. That is a cameo I'm okay with.
Yeah, that's one I would definitely like to see. And I feel like I'm not as against cameos as a lot of people are. It's sometimes that the cameos can make the world feel very small, but this period of time is literally about all those different threads coming together. So I feel like this is actually a time where those cameos are perfectly okay. I don't want it to take over the story, but yeah, this should be about how, you know, I mean, who is the first Fulcrum? When does Ahsoka come back, you know, and kind of show up and start helping as Fulcrum during the Rebel time? Like,
that's another person that could show up. You're right. I forgot that like Ahsoka and Mon Mothma were acquainted, and that goes down.
Yep. Like who is the first Fulcrum? You know, I mean, gosh, I don't want to convince myself into thinking this, but you know, we're gonna have more of the ISB and more of Cyril and Deborah, and I'm really curious about their story and where they're gonna go. But they're probably gonna start meeting some other people who are significant to these things, and if they meet a young Agent Callus, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world to me.
Dude, that would be kind of sick, actually. No, there's a lot. There's actually, like, now that you think about it, there's so much going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also, if memory serves, the Fulcrum title was started back in the Clone Wars. I believe, like, Anakin used it for something.
Yes, he did.
But then, you know, I think Ahsoka might have been the first Fulcrum,
right?
And then it got passed on to Callus. But
yeah, you're right. That's right. At some point, we established that Fulcrum was a term that Anakin and Ahsoka had used, so Ahsoka started it.
Yeah, I just did a quick Wikipedia search, and it's like it was a frequency used by Anakin during the Clone Wars. The only people aware of it were Obi-Wan, Admiral Yularen, and Saw Gerrera and Ahsoka Tano were the only ones that were aware of its existence. And then obviously, like, everything falls apart, and then it was used by Ahsoka. Bail Organa actually said, like, we need a code name for you, and Ahsoka suggested Fulcrum. But either way, there are so many people, actually, now that I think about it, you're right that, like, I mean, we just listed off but like very plausible people that could show up in the show. Anyone from Ghost Squadron from Rebels.
Yep.
Obi-Wan, Cal Kestis, Ahsoka, the Emperor, Masamita. I mean, Darth Vader's always around somewhere. Like honestly, any of these people could very, not surprisingly, make an appearance in Andor Season 2. Or none of them could.
Yeah. Yeah, and like, I'm fine if none of them do, but I want them to at least be referenced, you know? Like,
yeah.
One thing Andor Season 1 never mentioned is, like, what do the senators think of this Darth Vader person? What do they know about him, you know? He's obviously hanging around. He's obviously, like, Princess Leia isn't surprised to see him when they meet at the beginning of New Hope, so he's involved in the Empire somehow.
She's down to diss him to his face too, so clearly she's not that afraid of him.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's why I feel like it's a tightrope walk. This is the kind of show that could go phenomenally bad. I really trust this creative team that they're gonna make it work, and I'm really excited to see them make it work. I'm nervous, but I'm really hopeful, and I'm trying to get too much in the expectations game. But I just know that like bringing all this together, it's a lot, and we're just gonna see where they go.
Yeah, and I feel like again, I have faith. I have
Yeah.
faith that in the end of the day, um, they will do they will pull this out, and it may not be exactly as season one was, but like you said, as long as it gets pretty damn close, I'll be very happy.
Yeah.
And also, I'm just gonna point out, I'm just in a mood to rewatch all the Star Wars properties before I go to Star Wars Celebration. But Mandalorian season 1 was amazing. No one thought we could ever top that.
Yeah.
And Mandalorian season 2 kind of tops it, and then season 3 is not as good. But season 2 was better than season 1 in that instance. And so I feel like
have we had a total of we've had 4 seasons of Mandalorian total, right?
3.
3. Okay,
so 3, and then there's that 2 episodes in the middle of Book of Boba Fett.
I actually think season 3 is phenomenal, but I think that's because I'm a lot more invested in the story of the other Mandalorians and like the taking back of Mandalore and stuff like that.
Don't get me wrong, Matthew. I fucking love season 3. I just don't think personally it was as like. I mean, it's like basically like if season 2 was a 9.9 for me, then season 1's a 9.8 and season 3 is a 9.6. Like they're all fair. Great to me, but for my ranking, I thought that season 2 was the best. Either way, though, my point was Mandalorian didn't have there's no point to have a significant drop in quality. And that's really, I mean, you think about live action Disney made Star Wars shows. Ahsoka was 1 season so far. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan was 1 season, but Book of Boba Fett was 1 season. Like we haven't gotten multi-season shows outside of The Mandalorian. So precedent shows that maybe they actually haven't figured out in that regard, or maybe I'm just a hopeless optimist when it comes to this.
I will point out that like in this new Disney era, we have gotten multiple seasons of Bad Batch, but that is
I said live action show. Live action.
Yeah,
Bad Batch though also held up pretty damn well.
Also raises some other questions about people who might be running around at this time.
Oh my God.
You know, one thing I was thinking before is, we know that Bail and the rest of the rebels, the rest of the like non-Ghost rebels, are in touch with Rex because they're the ones who put the Ghost crew in touch with Rex. So, or maybe it's just Ahsoka. Like, and again, I don't need to see all of that, but all that's possible. And I think it's just it's helpful for me, and I hope it's helpful for you in the audience, just to have this chance to think about like this is such a busy time in the universe of Star Wars right now, and so all these things could interact.
And I feel like that's what makes this exciting is what we said. I mean, we've gotten trailers, we've gotten behind the scenes thing on Disney Plus, but by and large, I think Andor did, because of its success of season 1, Disney does not feel the pressure to like spill a bunch of the beans in the trailers. Like I feel like in previous things, they tried to show like give something, not directly, but give a little more away in the trailers to try and entice people to watch. But, and this is just again speculation on my part, maybe they just don't feel like they have to do that, and they can just sneak in these, these characters and these individuals, because everyone's going to watch it. Not everyone, but Star Wars fans are going to watch it anyway because Andor season 1 was such a smash hit. People were kind of chomping at the bit for season 2. Versus, with Ahsoka, they didn't have to reveal that Grand Admiral Thrawn made an appearance or things like that. But they gave pretty direct. They showed us him. They showed us Sabine in the trailer. They gave a lot away in the trailer. Hera.
Yeah.
And Andor, I just rewatched the trailer. They give fucking nothing away. Like, I have no idea what's gonna happen in this show. And that's what I like about it. That's what I prefer. Like, give me just little a flash of Orson Krennic, get me excited. A flash of what I think maybe it's as a Chandrone wedding. I don't know for sure, but like that's what a show is meant to be, is get you like thinking, but like really have no idea what's gonna happen. And so I think that the fact that it was so successful and it's in this era, we really don't know who could show up or what's going to happen.
Yeah. I think Krennic is the only real big name character we were like, oh, he's going to be in season 2.
Yes. Yep. I think that's really, and like I'm pretty sure that this is also like at some point we're gonna see how Andor meets K2 or K2 K9 K2. What's his name?
K2, yeah.
K2, yeah. Um, and I mean, again, I guess kind of not really spoiler, I guess, but as y'all have, if you've listened to previous episodes, I'll be in Japan for Star Wars Celebration, and on the guest list of people who will be there, besides Diego Luna, is Alan Tudyk, who plays K2, which would lend itself to Andor season 2 coming out, that he will be present in that show,
Right.
or in that season. So just kind of connecting some dots there.
Yeah, that could be fun. Speaking of Star Wars Celebration, we're going to have a whole members only episode with Alex talking about all the things he learns and experiences and gets to see at Star Wars Celebration, because that's always a good time to kind of gauge everything that's going to be coming out in Star Wars for the next year. We also just found out, I think just this morning, possibly last night, that that we are getting another Tales of the show, which has kind of become a recurring series, but it's more an anthology series. But this time it's going to be Tales from the Underworld. We're going to get a full announcement about that on May 4th, and you're probably going to hear some about it at Celebration. But we know that it's going to be Tales of the Underworld, and one of the characters who we're going to get a story of, Asajj Ventress. And we'll be talking a lot more about that in the members-only section. And again, to become a member, so you get bonus content at the end of every episode. You get... Actually, you know what? I'm going to cut all that out because I realized we just gave away most of it. So... speaking of becoming a member, not only do you get full free episodes like that one we're going to do about Celebration, but you also get bonus content at the end of the episode. In today's bonus content, Alex and I are going to be talking about another new piece of information we got about another upcoming Star Wars property. So we'll go into more detail about that in the members only section. And of course, to become a member, it's only $5 a month, $55 a year. All the information is on our show notes. Or if you go to theethicalpanda.com and just scroll down a bit, you'll find the join button. Again, $5 a month, $55 a year. You get no ads. You get content faster, often a couple days or even a week faster. And most importantly, you get to help us keep the lights on. So just think about doing that. Alex, as always, thank you so much. We'll have that bonus content in just a moment. For everybody else, thank you so much. Live long and prosper.
And I'm just going to add one thing to the members. If you join in the next couple weeks, we're going to do an emergency episode of what I learned about Andor before the show comes out. And they're going to be doing a panel there, so you'll get some inside info right before the show comes out. So little extra nugget there for everyone.
Yep.
But like Matthew said, live long and prosper, and also stay classy, Ferrix.
There you go.
My kind friend decided to give me his badge to the Visions panel so I can go to one panel in person.
Oh, nice. That'll be awesome.
And I will have like access to the Andor panel, just not in person. I'll have one of the extra screens. So the only one I won't get to fucking see is the Grogu and Mando one. I'll have to find a way to stream that on my phone or something, but
you'll get in. You'll find a way to
get in. It'll be fine. I'll figure something out.
All right, welcome back, members. So, Alex, what is the new piece of information we got about a new show coming up for Star Wars?
Yeah. So on May 4th, which is now the third in a row they're doing this, they're releasing another Tales of series. So previously, we've had Tales of the Jedi and then Tales of the Empire. And this year, we're getting Tales of the Underworld, which will be, spoilers, if you want to stop now, but two different characters will be following the origin story of Cad Bane, a famed bounty hunter we see in the Clone Wars and in Bad Batch and in Book of Boba Fett.
Yep. So
and the other
live
half,
action and animated.
And yeah, we're seeing it all over the place. Cad Bane's a fan favorite, so very excited for that. And the other half, I believe, I'm assuming it'll be 3 episodes each. We get some info on Asajj Ventress as she works her way through the underworld. But this is not young Asajj Ventress. This is post Dooku's betrayed her. I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like even after the events of the book. What is the book, Matthew?
Oh God, it's not. Is it Lost Star? I think. Hold on one second. We're so bad at this game. Dark Disciple.
Yep, I'm gonna say that again. And we see Asajj Ventress, and not like origin story of Asajj Ventress, but her like trying to navigate the underworld. Seemingly post Dark Disciple book, post this is all post the Clone Wars. how she's trying to survive, uh, during the existence of the Empire potentially,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Right.
before she appears in the Bad Batch. So we just get a little more information on how she's been operating in the shadows and in the underworld as a bounty hunter. And obviously, Asajj Ventress is another beloved fan favorite. So very excited
Right.
across the board for both Cad Bane and Asajj Ventress' story. And I think that we actually had an episode where we asked at some point, like, what you'd want to see. And I don't remember if it was Aaron or someone brought up wanting more info on some of these bounty hunters. And so I'm excited that we're getting that.
Well, yeah, because I think you're kind of bearing the lead a little bit because we were all super excited to see Asajj Ventress in the show, and we did, but we felt like they didn't answer one major question, which is a question that comes up because they've made clear Dark Disciple is still in the canon because it's part of
Oh yeah,
the post Disney takeover. It's not part of the extended universe because in that book she dies. And so, like,
she
you're talking
sure
about, like,
does.
how is she running around the underworld? What is she doing? Well, but how'd she get there? And clearly, like, the book is kind of from one perspective, and so I think there's lots and lots of ways in which she comes from a people who are very into rebirth from death and things like that. They're often kind of zombified, so, like, who knows? There's all sorts of ways it could happen, but we don't know. And I think, yeah, all three of us were like, we don't know this answer though. Still, we want to know the answer. So yeah, I'm really hoping that Tales of the Underworld gives us that.
Yeah, and like I love Asajj Ventress, and I think that we have not got enough of like what her life is like. 'Cause she's a very tragic story, and I'm very excited to see not only like how she survives, but just some of the internal dialogue within herself. Just like we got it wasn't perfect by any means, but how we kind of learned about how like Dooku became Count Dooku, the Sith Lord, and like kind
Right.
of what he was going on in his head and what the influences around him. It gave us a lot of insight into who he was as an individual. And that's what I'm hoping we get from both Asajj Ventress and Cad Bane in this show, because obviously Ventress is kind of this post all the trauma that befalled her during the Clone Wars, during the early days of the Empire, all of that. We're seeing that come to a head at this point in her life. Versus Cad Bane, in the trailer, we're seeing everything from him being a little kid to him without the tubes on his body, which
Mm-hmm.
so we get to see potentially what injured him so badly that he needed those tubes, and what pushed him to this life of crime. And something that this is very neat, something I'm hoping for, is there was a deleted episode in the lost episodes of the Clone Wars that were released after when they canceled the show, where Boba Fett and Cad Bane have a fight, and basically Boba Fett mortally wounds Cad Bane, but he ends up barely surviving.
Uh
And at least in that iteration, that is why in Book of Boba Fett it was like a poetic end for Boba Fett to kill Cad Bane. And so I would be kind of interested if Boba Fett made an appearance at the Cad Bane arc at the end, and we see that fight that had been drawn out, created decades ago by George Lucas, by Dave Filoni.
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
And we get to bring that into this now and see that. And then it would also, I think, backfill and give more meaning to their encounter of the Book of Boba Fett show, which, that would help. It would help a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I'll also say, for me, I think the part that I'm most excited about is, again, a lot of things translate very well to live action. I didn't think this would happen, but Cad Bane worked so well in live action.
I know.
I think one thing, though, that didn't work as well in live action was the Night Sisters.
Yeah.
The Night Sisters are the group that Ventress is from. They're kind of like Force witches, and they're very dark. They're not like, oh no, happy, smiley. They're very kind of like dark magic and very spooky, but not spoopy, like in the fun way. No, there's a sense of dread and death about them, and it just didn't. Like, I think it's very hard to translate that into live action in a way that doesn't seem silly. And they were decent in the Ahsoka show, but I think it didn't get that same sense of menace and mystery and mysticism about them. And so, knowing that we're going to go back into more of her backstory, and again, mostly in the time after she's left the Night Sisters, but we know from the Ahsoka show that in some ways the Night Sisters are staying alive, at least in this other galaxy. How that connects to her, like I'm excited to see where that can go.
Yeah,
So
it's gonna be really, and I was the last thing I'll say on this is I do actually hope that this continues to be like a little thing they do every May 4th. Just touch on two characters, people you can kind of deepen because it's a really easy way to deepen the connection to fan favorites. Like I would love, you know, eventually maybe something on Hondo Onaka or honestly like give me something about like young Bail or young Padme or like Tales of the Senate, there's a
yeah,
million things you could do with this. And I think that's very cool that every May 4th they're giving us a little more of that. And hopefully they also give us, like they have in previous years, right around May 4th, they seem to release a new Visions every year, which is the anime,
yep,
non-canonical, but anime studios takes on Star Wars. There is going to be a Visions Season 3 panel at Star Wars Celebration that I will be attending. And so I can report back on what we're going to see or hear from that. But I really love the little stuff they released on May 4th. And so I'm really excited
yeah.
for all of it.
I think it's gonna be great. So, all right. Well, Alex, thank you so much for all this. To our members, thank you so much. We have spoken.
Stay classy, Ferrix.